With his tangled hair, black-rimmed eyes, and voice that sounds like it comes from a bad dream, Robert Smith is a character unlike any other in rock music history. He is more than just the frontman of The Cure. He represents a whole generation that has been gone. For souls that have never found a place in this noisy world, songs like Disintegration, Lovesong, and Boys Don't Cry have become the soundtrack. The Cure has sold more than 30 million albums worldwide, and their 40th anniversary concert in Hyde Park in 2018 brought 65,000 fans to tears. Despite being known as the Goth King and a pioneer of alternative rock and post-punk, Robert Smith prefers to live a calm, scandal-free life without children or commotion, as though he never sought celebrity. And musician who got into backstage brawls during a European tour, was expelled from high school for being too powerful, and was once accused of racism based only on the title of one of their songs. He has nevertheless also remained with his first love for over 50 years. As he approaches 70, he continues to stand on stage and has never left The Cure, regardless of who else did. No spotlight can adequately convey the depth, haziness, silence, and beauty of Robert Smith's life, which is a melancholy melody. What really lurks beneath the wild hair, the smudged lipstick, and that dreamy gaze, and what made a youngster who was once abused for being different become a global cultural icon. Watch this video to learn more about early life. Although Robert Smith was born in Blackpool in 1959, his early years were never truly confined to a single location. Before moving in Crawley, West Sussex, the town that would eventually become the first cradle of The Cure, his family repeatedly migrated from Blackpool to Horley. Robert was raised in a quiet home with long corridors and wet evenings in southern England. He would frequently hide in his room and spin vinyl music, allowing the world and himself to be filled with music. Although they weren't impoverished, his family wasn't rich either. Alex Smith, his father, had a warm, rich voice, and had served in the Navy. He frequently performed for his kids at night, unknowingly teaching Robert the first songs. Rita, his piano-playing mother, felt that music was the only thing that could assist her kids navigate a world that was becoming more and more uncaring. Although neither parent coerced their children into doing anything, they always supported their play and singing as long as it brought them joy. Out of his 4 siblings, Robert was the third. His sister Janet, known as the piano prodigy, and who had received music instruction from their mother at an early age, was the family's star. Actually, Janet was the one who unintentionally shoved Robert in a different direction. In order to have his own voice and to avoid being dominated, he picked up the guitar. I had to take a different route since my sister was too good, and I went with the guitar, which has a voice that can shout without ever using words. Conflicts with inflexible conventions plagued Robert's school years. In the 1970s, wearing a black velvet skirt to school was deemed a deviant act, and he was once beaten after class for it. Although his peers saw him as an outsider who needed to be disciplined, his teachers labeled it a phase of rebellion. Robert remained the same despite those encounters. They just caused him to become more withdrawn, more defensive, and more reliant on music as his only refuge. Robert performed at the school's Christmas event in 1976 with his band Malice, which was the forerunner of The Cure, while he was a student at St. Wilfrid's Comprehensive. The success of the show exceeded all expectations. However, the administration chose to suspend him after determining that he had a detrimental impact on other students. He was kicked out of an institution that was meant to teach youth to be authentic. Robert, however, chose to sit down and write his first songs rather than give up. I don't play by sight, I play by ear. I write in solitude. Although Robert Smith didn't have a tragic upbringing in the conventional sense, the way society viewed him as a strange child, and the uncritical, silent support of his family helped to mold him into the stereotypical outsider who was able to transform his darkness into music that had an international impact early in his career. Robert Smith never went back to school in 1976 after receiving a suspension for his involvement with the band Malice. He picked music because it was the only option available to him, not because it was a predetermined route. Robert established Easy Cure, a rock band with experimental textures, frigid tones, and post-punk and French philosophical influences, with his boyhood pals Lol Tolhurst, Michael Dempsey and Porel Thompson. Later, the name was abbreviated to The Cure, a straightforward title with deep significance. Music as a remedy for suffering, loss and loneliness. When The Cure signed with Fiction Records in 1978, Robert was already the band's lead singer, creative director and creator of its visual identity at the age of 19. The Cure caused a sensation with their first single, Killing an Arab. The song was a philosophical allegory for the ridiculousness and pointlessness of violence, and it was inspired by Albert Camus's The Stranger. However, its title was ambiguous, and Robert Smith had to make it clear for years that the song was never meant to be racist. I would have given it a different name if I had known it would be misunderstood in that way. However, often the most warped things are also the most honest. Their 1979 debut album, Three Imaginary Boys, was a patchwork of disparate emotions conveyed by Robert's aloof voice and trademark chilly guitar, ranging from emptiness to cynicism and boredom. That was just the start. Robert guided the remedy farther into the depths of the human psyche with 17 Seconds, 1980, Faith, 1981, and Pornography, 1982, where death and meaninglessness seemed to be unavoidable aspects of existence and grief required no explanation. Pornography was a documented nightmare, rather than merely an album. Robert experienced near-total despair during the sessions. He subsequently acknowledged that the band veered between genius and devastation, descending into drugs, drink and growing personal fury. A real punch marked the conclusion of the 1982 tour. In Strasbourg, a backstage altercation between Simon Gallup and Robert Smith resulted in the band's brief dissolution. Their friendship had been shattered by arguments and restless nights. The Cure appeared to be done after just 3 albums, but despite the devastation, Robert continued to pursue music. After playing guitar for Susie and the Banshees, he and Stephen Severin founded the side band The Glove. In addition to aiding in his emotional healing, these excursions broadened his perspective on creativity, which would eventually enable The Cure to emerge from their own shadow. And Robert was more than simply an introspective guitarist when he rejoined The Cure in 1983, fatigued, alone, but composed. The songs he wrote have survived him as a musician. He was going to compose the best parts of his career from that debris. Career breakthrough. Robert Smith rejoined The Cure in 1984, standing by himself amid the rubble of previous battles. Bandmates and friends had left. The group's reputation was damaged. But rather than turning back, he proceeded, assembling each fragment to produce a fresh iteration of the remedy. He had never spoken out loud, but he was bolder, more emotionally layered, and wide enough to hold all the sorrow. The first pivotal moment occurred in 1985, with The Head on the Door. Although the same sense of sadness persisted, Robert's music sounded lovely for the first time. A new avenue was made possible by the song In Between Days, which turned suffering into a danceable melody with sad lyrics. Beyond the Gothic underground scene, the band started to gain popularity in the United States, going on foreign tours and rising through the charts. But Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, 1987, a daring, expansive double album with a wide range of musical elements, was the real deal. Robert created a musical feast that was as wild as his own emotional state, ranging from ballad to funk, from screeching guitars to whispery voices. Due to the album's enormous success, The Cure gained international recognition, similar to how Heaven, a song about love and sorrow, became a classic hit. It had a mystical quality that made it seem like it was both breaking apart and flying. It was just the start of a masterpiece. Disintegration, an album Robert wrote at the age of 29, was released in 1989. He was troubled by the feeling that time was dragging him down. He once said, "I wrote this album as a farewell, because I thought I'd die at 30. Disintegration was a journey more than a compilation of tunes. From Pictures of You's agonizing loneliness to Plain Song's hazy hopelessness, to Lovesong's agonizing love. One of the most comprehensive statements of love, death and ego breakdown in contemporary music, the album sold over 3 million copies and peaked high on the Billboard charts. Robert Smith and The Cure achieved their undeniable zenith between 1989 and 1992. Robert's picture became a pop culture icon, and the Prayer Tour sold out all around the world. Acknowledged as the unique face of Gothic rock by all demographics, and featured on MTV and Rolling Stone. Ironically, though, Robert retreated more and more as his success increased. He didn't pursue fame, acquire mansions, or make The Remedy a commercially viable brand. In the early 1990s, Robert Smith adhered to a single principle, despite the rock industry becoming more and more commercialized. His music always spoke to the listener's deepest emotions, since he always composed it when he had something genuine to say. Personal life: Robert Smith has always stood out in a rock world full of mayhem, short-lived loves, never-ending scandals, and never-ending parties. He was a guy of integrity, and he never concealed it. Just one woman. Robert first met Mary Poole at St. Wilfrid's School in Crawley in 1972, when he was just 13 years old. It took them a while to fall in love. Initially buddies, they eventually came to know one another as they grew older. Mary remained silently, without passing judgment, and without leaving, even though Robert's band was constantly changing its lineup, and he was suspended from school and beaten for wearing a velvet skirt. In 1976, the year the treatment was established, they formally became a couple. They stayed together for more than 10 years before getting married in 1988. They didn't have children because they didn't want to, not because they couldn't. Robert once remarked, "I can't imagine bringing a child into this world while I'm still figuring out how to survive in it myself." Rather, he decided to write about his love for Mary. For her, The Cure wrote their most exquisite love ballad, Lovesong. During those unending trips, a timeless vow was made. No marital dissolutions due to popularity, no regrets following intoxicated evenings, simply a man who always returned home to the woman who used to sit and listen to him play guitar when he was 15. Nevertheless, Robert Smith's life was not any easier, because of love. He has struggled with worry, insomnia, inexplicable depressions, and the sense of alienation among strangers. At times, he virtually disappeared from the public eye, only showing up on stage or in studios, where he could yell without anybody questioning why. Robert was never fond of being in the spotlight. It was only because of the music that he stood in it. Behind the scenes was always what he really enjoyed. Mary, a cup of tea late at night, and a peaceful room, as well as incomplete drafts. Mary is the one constant that hasn't altered the path if The Cure is a journey. And the reason Robert Smith never perished in the raging waves of his inner turmoil is because he always had someone, not a location, to turn to. Disagreement, miscommunications, and chaos. One of the few bands to have remained untarnished by drugs, arrests, or sex scandals for almost 50 years, is The Cure. However, this does not imply that Robert Smith's path was without difficulties. In other respects, miscommunications, and perhaps poor decisions, resulted from his silence and refusal to publicly clarify himself. The band itself was the closest source of the first altercation. During the Pornographic tour in 1982, Robert Smith and bassist Simon Gallup got into a heated argument that led to them fighting backstage in Strasbourg. There was more to the fight than a dispute over sound levels or the set list. It was the result of months of intense schedules, psychological strain, and the clash of two powerful, imaginative egos. The Remedy almost collapsed. The band was silent for a year after Robert's temporary departure. Lowell Tolhurst, another old acquaintance, caused the second rupture, co-founder of the band and Robert's boyhood friend, who played keyboards before switching to drums. Following dissolution, Robert had to make the difficult choice to fire Tolhurst because of his escalating drinking, which was having a negative effect on their output and workplace atmosphere. It was a really painful decision. Robert understood the pain of losing someone who had been by his side since he was a young boy more than anyone else. However, he had to decide between the band's survival and his allegiance to the past. Not every collision originated internally. Robert Smith was saddled with a label he never intended from the band's 1978 debut track, Killing an Arab. The title was immediately misconstrued as racist in a politically sensitive environment, despite the fact that the song was a philosophical metaphor about the folly of human existence, and was inspired by Albert Camus' classic The Stranger. Even worse, extreme movements misquoted it. After receiving constant criticism, Robert was had to make official declarations refuting any affiliation with hate groups, and include disclaimers in subsequent releases that clarified the song's literary provenance. I would have given it a different title if I had known, but in a late apology for something he never intended, he stated, "I never wrote music to hurt anyone." Robert continues to be a contentious figure among certain detractors years later. Some accuse him of acting strange to attract attention, saying that his wild hair, smudged lipstick, and dark clothing were marketing gimmicks, but they forget. That is how Robert Smith appeared at the age of 16. Before contracts, stages, and any kind of notoriety. It was who he was, and not a tactic. In his memoir Blink-182, Mark Hoppus humorously described an incident in which Robert Smith attempted to kiss me at an after-party after their 2004 Wembley performance. This was one of the more recent misunderstandings. Despite being humorous and free of malice, the story caused a sensation in the media. Robert remained silent. Maybe he's been too accustomed to hearing about him from people who don't actually know him. Robert Smith has been at the heart of disputes for more than 40 years, not because he chose to be, but rather because he is the type of artist who won't compromise to appease the masses. And perhaps that very resolution is what keeps him here under the stage lights, with his guitar and songs that have never ceased haunting his listeners. He would sooner argue with his best friend, lose a record deal, or be misinterpreted, than go against who he really is. Legacy and influence. Although he didn't create Gothic rock, Robert Smith is credited with making it timeless. Robert reinvented a type of music that didn't need to yell to feel intense or need darkness to feel chilly, all while sporting smudged lipstick, a distant gaze, and melancholic tunes. Although he never claimed to be a spokesperson for a movement, a whole generation of black-clad youngsters scribbled journals with lyrics about disintegration and looked to The Cure as the only friend who actually paid attention. The impact of Robert Smith extends well beyond Gothic rock. He established himself as an example of the kind of artist who isn't scared to be emotionally open, never tries to project a cool image, and doesn't need controversies or rebellion to get attention. Robert's music and spirit are cited as a major source of influence by artists such as Trent Reznor, 9 Inch Nails, Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins, Placebo, Interpol, and even Billie Eilish. More than that, Robert changed the way musicians view songwriting as a process of self-healing, rather than as a finished good to be consumed. "Music isn't something to sell," he once said. "What prevents me from vanishing is music." When a reporter asked Robert if he was happy when The Cure was elected into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2019, he responded with a deadpan expression, "Not as much as you do." The response, which was honest and scathing, swiftly became viral as a meme as it completely encapsulated Robert. No pretending, no showmanship, no performance. Robert Smith became a pop cultural phenomenon, even in terms of appearance. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, his face was featured on magazine covers, tattoos, posters, and t-shirts. Even though the fashion industry used to make fun of his appearance, his style is now admired as a representation of defiance via silence and anti-conformity. His impact as a musician extends beyond the tens of millions of albums he sold. It also includes the survival of individuals who once thought they were alone. Pictures of you in the same deep water in Lullaby. Individuals saw themselves, their unidentified memories, and their unsolved questions as you did. Furthermore, nobody gives a damn about genre, style, or technique when crowds join him in singing at these twilight performances. They sing because they found solace in those songs when they were at their lowest. For this reason, merely referring to Robert Smith as a musician is insufficient. He is a live example that you can be unique and still be loved. He writes songs for the voiceless, a reminder that you can still create something lovely for the world, even if you are carrying grief. Life in the present. Today Robert Smith is 65, his hair, which used to be wildly disheveled, is now thin and graying, but he doesn't change it. He still wears large coats, scuffed shoes, and black eyelines, but his glance has transformed, serving as a silent reminder that he never lost up on who he really is. Quietly perceptive, as though he's seen, heard and comprehended enough, rather than ferociously defiant. The Cure made a comeback in 2024 with Songs of a Lost World, a brand new musical voyage that is still replete with longing, loneliness, and unsolved issues after more than 16 years of stillness. The album received positive reviews. Because it was genuine, rather than because it became viral, fans welcomed it like a gift. Robert's music still feels like a handwritten journal with smudged pen, even in a time when the majority of celebrity is algorithm-driven and filtered through well-chosen imagery, never polished for exhibition. On the 50th anniversary of The Cure's debut album in 2029, Robert once hinted that he would quit. However, it won't be a noisy farewell if it ever occurs. No grandiose press announcement, no farewell tour. If nothing else, there will be a little stage, some vintage tunes, and the sound of a guitar playing in the dim light. He is almost unnoticeable outside of the music industry. No reality shows, social media, or nostalgic podcast appearances. He lives in an old house in Sussex with his wife Mary, the only woman he has ever openly loved. In addition to caring for their garden and raising cats, Robert still writes occasionally. He keeps the aspects of himself that he has never shared, not for release. Robert Smith is considered an icon by many. Maybe he never made an effort to be anyone at all to himself. He is just a man, lonely, truthful, quiet and devoted, who decided to use music rather than words to convey his suffering, and he saved millions by doing it. Not all musicians make it to the point where their music endures. Robert Smith did so out of honesty rather than cunning, and perhaps he doesn't require a farewell after all of this, because Robert is always present in the notes when someone plays a love song, Disintegration, or A Forest. In the shadows, in people who used to feel like they had no place. Not only will Robert Smith always be remembered for his iconic songs, but also for staying loyal to himself for almost 50 years in a world that never stopped yelling. A guy who transformed loneliness into art and made darkness a haven for millions of lost souls. A man of depth, gentleness, stillness and persistence. Noise was never necessary for him to become great. In addition to music, Robert Smith leaves behind a legacy of commitment, empathy, and the demonstration that you can be who you are and yet be loved. How do you feel about the emotional journey of Robert Smith? What song of his has stuck with you the most? Since every musical memory is a part of this narrative, please share it in the comments section below. To ensure you don't miss the next voyage, where we continue to share true stories about real individuals who lived, who suffered, and who left behind something remarkable, don't forget to hit the bell, like and subscribe buttons. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the upcoming video. Farewell.